Wait, so today we're going to dive into something pretty wild.
Yeah.
This blog post, it's called Common Themes Between the Bible, WW2, DOGE, and
Wow.
yeah, and then it repeats the title a couple times. But
Okay.
yeah, it's by Ira Warren Whiteside, and you can find this over on the Information Sherpa blog.
All right.
And yeah,
Quite a title.
it's a lot,
Yeah.
right?
You don't see the Bible and DOGE, like the cryptocurrency, in the same sentence every day.
Right. Like at first glance, it's like, okay, is this like a joke?
Yeah.
But no, this person is like really trying to connect these things.
Yeah, they're trying to make a serious point here, and I think it's worth trying to understand it.
Yeah, for sure. So they start out with this, borrow from Peter to pay Paul,
Right.
which, okay, pretty common saying, but they're trying to connect that to like modern government financing.
Especially during World War II, they actually used this acronym DOGE, Department of Government Expense, to describe it.
Okay, so DOGE,
Yeah.
not like the meme coin
Not the dog.
with the Shiba Inu.
Right. This is not financial advice.
Yeah, definitely not.
It's not clear if DOGE as the Department of Government Expense is like a real historical term or something the author just made up.
Right.
But I think what they're getting at is this idea that moving money around, borrowing to cover expenses, that's kind of like a timeless thing governments do.
Right.
And like today with technology, it's just happening at warp speed.
Yeah, and they even make a connection to like World War II and computers.
Exactly. They talk about the code-breaking efforts in London during the war and how, that was this huge push that kind of kickstarted the whole development of computers.
Right, so like the very first computers.
Yeah, exactly.
And so then, like, that leads to all the computing power we have today, which,
Yeah.
Makes it possible to have these, like, super complex and fast financial transactions,
Right, like borrowing from Peter to pay Paul on, like, a global scale, essentially.
Yeah. Right, but then they get into this whole thing about forensic auditing and, like, child of transactions, and I gotta be honest, those were kind of throwing me off.
Yeah, those are some pretty dense terms.
Yeah, for sure.
So think of it like this. When you say borrow from Peter to pay Paul, it implies that money's always moving, right? It's a flow.
Okay.
And the author's point is that with forensic auditing, you can actually trace those flows, no matter how complicated they get. Like, every transaction leaves a mark. It creates a child, so to speak.
So, like, are they saying nothing can really be hidden anymore? That every dollar or Bitcoin or whatever, it leaves a trail?
Basically, yeah. And here's where I think it gets really interesting. The author argues that all these new technologies, they've definitely sped things up, made things more complex.
Right.
But the math behind it all, the accounting principles, those aren't new. They've been around for centuries, right?
So it's not really about new ideas, just new tools.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, those tools, they operate at such a scale and speed that we're talking about a whole new level of transparency. Right.
And that makes you wonder, is this a good thing,
Yeah.
Is this where we want to be headed?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Like, the author kind of implies that total financial transparency is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, it makes me think about all these other questions like, could this stifle innovation if everyone's transactions are out in the open?
Yeah, exactly. Or like, what about, sensitive government information? Would that be more vulnerable?
Right, that's a huge concern.
And I don't know, it makes me think about privacy too,
Yeah, for sure.
If every single transaction is trackable, does that erode our personal freedom in some way? Like, that's something I feel like the author could have dug into a bit more.
Totally agree. I think there's a whole ethical dimension here that the blog post just kind of skims over.
Right. So we went on this kind of crazy journey, biblical proverbs to wartime history and even Dogecoin, kind of.
Sort of, yeah.
But all tied together by this idea of financial flows and like how technology has just supercharged them. Yeah. And we just started to touch on some of the implications, right? Like, what does this increased transparency really mean?
Right. For governments, for businesses, for like everyday people.
Yeah. All of that.
And I think ultimately, the question is there anything really new happening here? Or are we just taking old ideas and using new tools to like amplify them?
Yeah. It's definitely something to think about.
For sure. And hopefully this deep dive gave you, our listeners, a few things to ponder as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us.